If a Chinese says Mayaweti, like, no problem, you got a problem.
Got a problem.
If he says Wenti Buddha, not a big problem, you got a big problem.
Hello, everyone. I'm here with the legend. And the legend, please introduce yourself.
Well, I'm hardly a legend.
You
are
are
the legend. But
You-
no, I'm Steve Kaufmann. I enjoy learning languages. For much of my career, for 7 years, I was a diplomat, and then I was in the forest industry, trading in lumber products. And along the way, learned a few languages. But then over the last 20 years, I've become particularly interested in language learning. And so I have a YouTube channel called Lingo Steve. Together with my son, some 20 years ago, we started a platform for language learning, and I can get into the background of why we did that. So that's kind of my third career, and I enjoy it. And along the way, I learn languages. Right now, I'm working on Persian and Turkish, which I focused on just before my trip to Turkey. And I love doing that. I love exploring, and that's who I am. And I should also say that I've known Luca for quite a while. So I've known Luca. We've met at various polyglot conferences, and there is a whole group of enthusiastic language learners, and I feel really happy that I discovered this group late in life, and it's a big part of what I enjoy doing. And I'm very happy to be together with Luca in this discussion.
Thank you. Lovely to have you here, Steve. And I said you're a legend because apart from speaking and learning a lot of languages, the thing I like the most about you and your channel is that you give very solid advice. There's no doubt that your YouTube channel and your life is very successful because you have relied on solid principles. You have learned the way, and then it's great that you're sharing it with the rest of the world. So, and this is one of the reasons why I'm excited and thrilled to have you today, because we have a series of questions about language learning. This is going to be a long form interview, so it's not just 10 minutes. We're going to go deep into a lot of philosophical questions as well as technical questions, polyglotry, language learning, and everything in between. So without further ado, let's get started with the first question. And the first question is, how has your process of learning languages changed from when you first started until today? I think you've been learning languages for 50 years. I don't know, 6 years?
No, because I'm 79. Okay. So I have been learning for a long time. So obviously, if we go back, I was born in Sweden. My parents were from Czechoslovakia. So I undoubtedly heard, and I know I heard languages at home in Sweden, Czech, German, Swedish. And undoubtedly that made my brain more flexible when it came to sounds and different ways of saying things. Even though I couldn't speak those languages, I just learned Swedish in Sweden. And when my family emigrated to Canada when I was 5 years old, I have no recollection of transitioning from a person who spoke Swedish into a person who spoke English, because I was with kids my age, and they might have found my accent strange. I didn't find my accent strange. I was just trying to communicate. And pretty soon I could no longer speak Swedish. And my parents also said, we're in Canada now, we're going to speak English. And so we always spoke English at home. So you could say I was a language learner then. Then my experience at school in Canada, and you have to understand Montreal, which is a bilingual city today, in the 50s, was a city of what they call the two solitudes. So you had 1 million English speakers and 2 million French speakers that hardly communicated with each other. And so my experience of learning French at school was probably not very different from someone in Toronto or Vancouver learning French at school. Not very motivated, boring teachers, boring classrooms, fighting our way through grammar drills, the 16 verbs that take et, whatever it might be, whatever they threw at us. And I remember that, so one day, some friends of mine and we went to a football game, like Canadian football, which isn't soccer, not football as in Italy, but
yes.
And we had a bit of a discussion with the usher over our ticket. And so we had to speak to this guy in French. And what I remember is all I could come up with was words. Like, despite all of this heavy grammar instruction, moi, vouloir, moi, vous, words. So instead of having focused the instruction on acquiring words, as many words as possible, forget them, it doesn't matter. They tried to teach us the components, the structures, the grammar rules. And in the end, we had no grammar rules. All we had was words. I'll always remember that. When I actually had to finally use my French, I couldn't. All I could come up with was words. So the next sort of and I, in reading your book, which I have here, by the way, and which I read, and very interesting, and I'll refer to it from time to time. But you mentioned how there was a person who triggered your interest in language, and that was your English teacher. Well, you had the experience with German as well, but you said that you were a person who didn't think you could learn languages, and then Susan, your English instructor, convinced you that you could. And so I think for many language learners, there is a trigger, a person, or something that happens. And in my case, it was a professor that I had at McGill University. Maurice Rabotin was his name. And he just managed to make me interested in French civilization and culture. So whereas in school, I wasn't very interested, and all of a sudden I became very interested. And once you're interested, you can learn. And you learn by massively ingesting the language, listening, reading, because once you're in Montreal, you can buy a local newspaper. You can go. I went over to the University of Montreal, which is the French-speaking university over the hill, sit in some classes there. Like whatever, once you're motivated, you can. And nowadays, you don't have to be in a place where the language is spoken. You can find stuff on the internet. And then the next experience was Chinese, and I think I had no idea who Stephen Krashen was. I had no idea of theories about the input hypothesis or anything else. But always, my way of learning languages has been exposing myself to as much of the language as possible, speaking when I have the chance, not worrying about how it comes out, and continuing to listen and read. That has not changed. But the internet and technology has changed how I am able to go about doing that. And it's become easier to do it. Persian from Vancouver, but the basic principle has remained the same.
Agree 100%. For me, it's been pretty much the same. Now, this interview is about you and your story more than mine, but I just want to highlight the fact that the principles are always the same, no matter whether you're learning in the 50s or now, but then technology changes and, of course, in a way facilitates language learning. And for me, it's the same. I just realized after 20 years, 30 years of learning that language learning is simple, but not easy, meaning that we acquire language through massive input. And the thing that surprises me, because it's so obvious to us now, as I think experienced language learners, is that there's a certain resistance to that. So the knowledge is there, but I get the impression that sometimes, in academia, they talk about that. The Stephen Krashen sometimes gets ignored, but the thing that strikes me the most, I think that in Canada still, in the United States, in Italy, they don't implement these simple ideas. Maybe some teachers. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the school system hasn't realized, okay, there's people that have been talking about language acquisition more than language learning, but, this is a technical distinction. Why do you think people are not following suit? Why do you think the school system is not following these, implementing these instructions, but these principles?
Well, imagine that there is a massive, I just thought of this right now, a massive industry teaching people how to ride a bicycle. They went to conferences, they went to college to learn how to teach people how to ride a bicycle. I wonder if it turns out that all you have to do is get on a bicycle and start pedaling. So do you think the people who are in the industry of teaching people how to ride a bicycle are interested in teaching the theory is, look, you want to ride a bike? Here's a bike, get on, fall a couple of times, and then you'll be okay. Are they going to teach that? I don't think so. So I think the industry, the teaching industry, it's easier to teach grammar because I taught you, the subjunctive. Now I'm going to test you on the subjunctive. And I'll give you 7 out of 10 or 5 out of 10. And the reality is that until you've had enough exposure to the language, situations where the subjunctive is used, where you kind of noticed it a few times and noticed it again, until all of that has happened, all the explanations about the subjunctive are a waste of time. The good students will remember well enough to get 8 out of 10. The poorer students won't. And it doesn't mean that they'll use it correctly the next time. But it's easy for the teacher. I'm going to teach you the subjunctive. Here is the subjunctive. Writes it up on the board, blackboard and stuff. It's easy to do. I think in your book you said somewhere you don't learn or maybe it was quoting Lampariello, but you said you don't learn a language from the grammar. You learn the grammar from the language. 100%. 100%. So that means the teacher has to get out of the way. Teacher doesn't like to get out of the way. The teacher likes to impose,
You're right, and I agree with you. But I also believe that, as you pointed out, I think the role of the teacher, as far as I'm concerned, is to inspire rather than instruct. So in my case, my French teacher inspired me at school, and other teachers. I think it was unfortunately a minority of the good teachers, but those who taught me something, they taught me through inspiration and example rather than instruction. Because then, if they tell you something, you tend to forget it, but they make you feel in a certain way. They kind of pique your interest, and they talk about something. I had a history and philosophy teacher was great, a French teacher, and other teachers. I remember them. I don't remember what they said. I remember how they made me feel. And I remember this inspiration that Susan gave me, especially because she came along and she told me, Luca, okay, let's start again. And of course, she helped me with English, but I think the fact that she was, preparing these video cassettes, back in the day, she was recording movies, and the enthusiasm she had towards me that really made me learn. So I think school is still important, but I think that to me, if I had this ideal school, I have an academy online, but this is the ideal thing is to inspire and then tell them, look, do whatever you want to do, because learning is a personal road. So you learn by yourself, and then we can come here and have conversations about the book you read. Even if, like you, I don't like tests, I don't like questions about the stuff I read, but still, I believe that the teachers in general still have a place, but it's more like inspiration rather than instruction. This is my humble opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And teachers can be extremely important. Again, in your book, you talk about the why. Now, it starts with the why. If you have no interest, if you have no reason to learn the language, you're not going to learn the language. So I think in many cases, the teacher is the stimulus that creates the why. But it doesn't have to be just a teacher. It can be someone else. But the role of the teacher, I think, if I were a teacher in a classroom, how do I motivate? Let's say that there are 5% of the kids in the class who are interested. How do I get that to 10? It's never going to be 100%. But if I can at least get another 5% interested in the language, that's major. Once they're interested, they're going to start learning on their own. The other thing that you said in the book, and which struck a chord, is you have to, at some level, believe you can do it. So I think, I can't remember where it was in your book, but someone persuaded you that even though you were this monolingual Italian who didn't think he could learn languages, somewhere along the way, someone persuaded you that you could. And that's big. I remember, I studied Mandarin as a Canadian government language student back in, 1968. And I'd always hesitated to throw myself into Cantonese because I had persuaded myself that I had struggled to get 4 tones more or less correctly. The idea of 9 tones was just too intimidating. Like, there's no way I'm going to, Yeah. How can I 9 tones? And I was in a bookstore in Vancouver, in sort of a Chinese bookstore. And this guy had put out a book, and he said, well, actually, you don't need 9 tones. 6 tones is enough. And he illustrated these 6 tones. And all of a sudden I said, you know what? 6 tones I can cope with. And he also pointed out that we have tones in English and maybe in Italian. Like, I haven't really thought about it for Italian, but in English, we use tones for emphasis. We're constantly, low to high, high to low, flat. There's tones all over English. So the idea of actually producing the tones is not the issue. The issue is producing them, in the case of Chinese, for meaning. Not for emphasis in the sentence, but for specific meaning for that word or for that sound, But going from 4 to 6 seemed possible. So all of a sudden, I had this confidence that I could learn Chinese. So it's just to illustrate how important it is that if the teacher is able to create the why, like stimulate your interest, and at the same time convince you that you can learn. And many people who study, even people who study language, who go to the local library to their Spanish class for 15 years and never get anywhere, deep down, they don't think they can learn. And they don't think they can actually become fluent. They can maybe learn a few words and they can learn some grammar rules, but they don't see themselves as someone who can become fluent. And I think there you provide a great service through your book and through your other activities, persuading people that anyone can learn. And I'll just finish off on one point. So here I was born into a multilingual environment, call it, in Sweden and Canada, and hearing different languages at home. And so your stereotypical polyglot is somebody from, say, Sweden or Holland or Singapore. But here's this monolingual Italian. And I can add monolingual Brit in the case of Richard Simcoe. So the stereotype is the Brits can't learn languages, the Italians can't learn languages. And of course, the fact is that anyone can learn languages. And I was at the Polyglot Conference in Montreal, and I had a room full of polyglots, and I was giving a talk to 600 people. And I said, how many of you grew up in a multilingual family? Nobody, like maybe 3 hands went up. So yes, you can say growing up in a multilingual environment it makes it easier. You have advantages. You've heard more sounds. Your brain is more flexible. All these things are true. However, it's not a condition. It's not a condition. You don't have to be born in a multilingual environment. Anyone can learn, as you say, all the time.
I completely agree with you that also psychological factor plays a huge role. This is another thing that is not talked about at school. Nobody has ever taught us, hey, why do you learn French? But now the why is important, and I agree with you and you agree with me. Let's talk more about the technical stuff, or some of the technical stuff. For example, you're a very successful language learner, but have you ever failed at learning any language, or even worse, fallen out of love with any language? Like, I don't like this anymore, or just I'm not interested anymore, let's drop it.
So first of all, the word failure is not a word that I would use, because as again, Lampariello says, a language is something that's worth learning even poorly, or words to that effect. So I consider my goal in any language is to get to B2. If I get to a solid B2, I'm not going to forget that language. I may speak with mistakes, I may struggle, but I'm not going to forget it. So B2 is so if you're climbing up and you have to get to a ledge where you can then rest and stay, and even if you don't use the language for quite a while, it'll be there when you come back and you can sort of jump right in. So B2 is the goal. And there are any number of languages where I have not reached B2. Like if you were to start speaking to me in Romanian or Greek or even Czech, where according to Link, I have a vocabulary of 60,000 words, but I never got to a point where I was using it a lot so that it's sort of firmly anchored. Czech, I think would take me a couple of days and I'd be doing fine. Romanian would take me longer, although vocabulary very similar to Italian. So and of course, Korean. So the factors that make me not reach B2, okay, and I'll stop and I'll say, even when I don't reach B2, discovering the language, discovering the country behind the language, the culture, the history, and all of the things that I discovered along the way while learning that language are tremendously valuable. So it's never a failure. Okay. But I didn't reach the level where the language is, where I'm on that ledge on the mountainside. Okay. Didn't reach B2. Why? Case of Korean, when I was doing Korean 10 or 15 years ago, it was so hard to find interesting content. So hard. And Korean has so many little words that all have 8 meanings. It was just too difficult, actually. So the attraction, in other words, interesting content, hard to find. The difficulties were too many, because you look words up in the dictionary and you still don't know what it means. I think now, if I went back to Korean, if that were a priority of mine, I would do a lot better, because you can grab stuff off YouTube, off Netflix, anywhere you want. I can bring it into Link, start reading and looking up words. The dictionaries are much better. We now have, for example, at Link, we have AI dictionary lookup so that the meaning is relevant to the sentence. So if you have 8 potential meanings for this little word, monosyllable, in fact, it'll give you the one that's relevant to the sentence. And as long as you're able to get through the sentence, if I have a meaning, I refer to this, the parable, Zhuangzi's parable of the fish net. The fisherman, once he's caught the fish, he throws away the fish net. And where's that effect? Then he says something like, once we have the words, we don't need the words anymore. That's the way it is. You need the meaning of the word in order to get through that context. But once you have the word, I don't worry about, am I going to remember that word? It's in there somewhere. It'll come back again and then I'll forget it and stuff. So as long as you can get through what you're trying to read, it's the content that holds you. And if that content is meaningful and interesting, and you're going through these words and they're kind of rushing past you, and you look them up and you get a meaning and you throw it back into your memory reserve. So all of those things, in the case of Korean, it was too early for me. So the kinds of things that will make me stop are the difficulty level, also the case with Arabic, because of Lebanese, Levantine Arabic, Egyptian Arabic, Fusha. It's an inherently difficult language because the writing system is unfamiliar to me. Anyway, it's difficult, and yet it's hard to find content at my level. So wherever the difficulty is great and the attraction in the form of interesting, compelling content is hard to find, that's where my enthusiasm tends to peter out. So, right now, the other thing that prevents me from getting to B2 is I'm distracted. So I'm working on Persian now. I should do more Arabic. So I do Arabic for a while, and then I'm going to Turkey. Well, I better focus on Turkish for a while. So you focus on Turkish. So those are the things. But would I consider that my efforts in Arabic, my efforts in Turkish, which is extremely incomplete, or in Persian, which is a little further ahead, that any of those are failures? No, they're not failures, but I haven't yet reached B2 in any one.
Anyway, I would just point the fact that it's not a failure. It's just you enjoy the process. It doesn't matter if you reach B1 or B2, but it's important to stress, and then we're going to move on to the next question.
Right.
You made a very good point about the fact that somehow, for some reason, I don't know why, I'm not a neuroscientist, but until you reach a certain level, if you don't reach that level, the language shrinks for whatever reason. Just B1. We call it B2. For those who don't know, B2 is just a level within the CEFR. It's a Central European Framework for Languages, or something along those lines. If you can look it up, it's just for me and Steve, it means fluency, not perfection.
Right.
But if you don't reach that level, you're for whatever reason, and it's important if you want to use the language. I always talk about language learner, and I move on transition from language learner to language user. These are just terms for me, labels. But that's an excellent point. So just enjoy the process. If you reach B2, even better, because then you will keep it for life. It's just like marriage. So, well, it's debatable, but marriage is an interesting term. What have been some of your most unexpected relationships, personal or professional, as a result of language learning? I know your story. I read your book, so I know some of these stories are very interesting. What happened in your life because of your multilingualism, from business to personal relationships?
Well, for me, language has always been an adventure. So because I was very motivated to become fluent in French back as a 19-year-old, I ended up actually hitchhiking on a boat, working on this German vessel to get across to Europe, hitchhiked around in Europe, settled into France, and studied there for 3 years. So that was my French adventure, which was lovely. Like, it was magic. It was absolutely magic. Once you've learned a language and then you go to where the language is used, that's like magic. Because when you're studying, it's kind of artificial. But when you actually go there and everybody around you is speaking this language, it's magic. So that was an adventure, a tremendous adventure. I had my period of learning Chinese, again, was exposure to this massive culture and learning about the sort of civilizational crash between the Western world and the Chinese world, and how in the early 20th century, the Chinese world reacted to it. I found all of that fascinating. Then I moved to Japan. So, and in my business, of course, my knowledge of Japanese was instrumental in my career, whether it be working for the government, then working for large Canadian forest industry corporations, and then eventually setting up my own business. It all relied on my knowledge of Japanese, because once you can communicate with the Japanese business people below the level of the trading companies. I don't know if you know how the Japanese economy is structured. It's probably a little different today, but when I was there, you had these large trading companies, Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo. And because most foreigners can't speak Japanese, most Japanese can't speak English, they did a lot of the trade. But the actual local wholesaler, house builder, lumber dealer, those people, they didn't speak English. I was able to get connected to those people and do a lot of business with them because of my Japanese. So that was instrumental from a business perspective. And I have had situations, even Swedish, even though the Swedes all speak English, if I'm talking to mill workers in Sweden and explaining the lumber grade in Japan, then if I can communicate with these people in Swedish, you can immediately see that there's a positive reaction. And that positive reaction even though I learn languages because of my interest in the culture, my current interest in the Middle East and Central Asia. Like I was just in Turkey, and so I spent 6 months, intensively trying to bring up the level of my Turkish. You go to Turkey, and first of all, I'm just on seventh heaven being able to use Turkish in Turkey. But the reaction from the people in Turkey.
Turkish delight.
A Turkish delight. So it's a magic. Actually, not only is he or she making me happy, because even if they speak English, they humor me in Turkish, which is not the case in some countries, as you know.
That's true.
No, they know that the guy speaks excellent English, but he's so happy that I'm speaking Turkish, he humors me in Turkish. So he makes me happy, but I also sense I'm making him happy because I'm speaking Turkish. So all of that is a wonderful feeling. And the Persians, the Iranians also there's different people who react differently if you speak their language. Some are very enthusiastic. Some are a little, why are you speaking my language?
Suspicious. Suspicious.
Suspicious. But the Turks and the Iranians, they just love it. So those are some of the things that make me feel, it's worthwhile on so many different levels. It's worthwhile at the level of learning about the history of Iran and the wonderful material we have, like, for example, that link that was created by Sahar, one of our tutors, 26 episodes on the history of Iran. And yet, if I'm at the supermarket in Vancouver and the checkout person is Iranian and I say salam, and we have a few words, and she's delighted and I'm delighted. So there's so many different levels at which language learning is so rewarding.
Absolutely. Just one quick point about what you said, which is really interesting about negotiation in Japan. I was reading yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I was reading in an Italian magazine. I know you know Japanese much better than I do. I speak it a little bit, but I've never been to Japan. I heard that, and this is a testimony to the fact that language and culture are intertwined. It's not just about, speaking. It's also understanding the nuances. For example, if a Japanese says, we'll think about it, that stands for, and yeah, maybe, but no. Well, in other cultures, the Anglo-Saxon culture is much more direct in certain, I've heard that saving face is very important in Japan, in Asia in general. I don't know if, in negotiations, you understand the code, you don't just understand the language, but you also understand the culture behind it and the use of certain sentences. This is what fascinates me about Japan. Everybody who went there, recently a friend of mine told me it's another world. And, it's very situational. The language is situational. You do certain things, it's different, and there's a beautiful culture behind it.
I mean, you don't want to make too much of these things. Because even say, okay, I'm going to be with a bunch of Italians, we're going to discuss business. You have to have a sense of how they think of their culture. That's not
exactly
unique
right.
to Japan. That's anywhere. And but you have to understand, for example, in Japanese, it's often the pause that's more important than what it's actually said. But this is not something that we cannot understand. And it's a bit like learning the language itself. It's only through enough exposure. You can't look up the rules. Like when a Japanese person says, X or Y or Z, what does it mean? No, you can't. It's not the rules. You can't explain that. But if you have been in that situation often enough, then you start to come up with a more polite expression. You start to come up with the Japanese style filler words, which has meaning but has no meaning. And but it's not like black and white different from other cultures. It's just it's a variations on a theme. But there's an expression, "Mae muki ni kento shimashou," which means we will consider this in a forward-looking manner, which means I'm not interested.
That's exactly right. That's what they talked about in the article. Yes.
Mae muki ni, like in a forward-looking manner. Mae muki ni kento shimashou. We will consider, okay, whatever. Is what he means. But I remember I was in Japan with this Swedish lumber delegation. And we have a tendency in the West to say our product is the best. Certainly North America, the Swedes, I'm sure the Italians, it's the best. It's the best. That does not, and so I had to tell the Swedish guy, he said, lumber is fine green and it's the best and high quality. I said, that doesn't go over very well. Like they know you're going to say that. So that's not worth saying. You have to be a little more humble. Humility goes over big in Japan.
Agreed.
And it's like, so anyway, the next day he said, our lumber is lousy. It's rotten. He said, and what's worse, we can't improve because we're too stupid. But it's true, and this is relatively unique to the Japanese. If a Japanese person if in doing business with the Japanese, if you say, can you do this? you're a business guy. We want you to do this. Can you do this? Japanese guy, so this, doryoku shimasu. We'll try our best. Okay, we'll try our best. That's pretty good. He's going to do it. Whereas North America, no problem. May not do it.
Yes.
And the Chinese are more like the North Americans. The Chinese, miyawenti. As one
No problem,
was working in China, said, if a Chinese says miyawenti, no problem, you got a problem.
Got a problem.
If he says wenti Buddha, not a big problem, you got a big problem.
Well, anyway.
So, Japan in that regard is very much the understatement, the humility. So you have to know that. You have to know that.
Of course.
But at some point, you get used to it because you have to be in enough situations. I always say that in life, the way our brains work is we develop these patterns that enable us to anticipate what's going to happen because we can't just respond from zero. We respond from all of our experiences and we anticipate. And we know from, imaging, magnetic resonance imaging of the brain that in our languages, when we understand our language, we actually anticipate what's coming. And we anticipate what's coming while we're learning. And if, in fact, what comes confirms that helps us confirm our knowledge of the language. If what comes back is different, then that also helps us. So that language learning has been called this probabilistic, error-driven process. But it's true in life. And so at first, guy says he's going to try his best. That's not good enough. He's got to, do it or stuff. And after a while, if you've been in that situation often enough, you naturally sense because you're with Japanese people. If I'm with Japanese people, I'm the only non-Japanese in a group of 5. I'm Japanese. I'm one of them. And I have a natural sense of what they're going to do.
It's about experience. Yeah. It's about prediction. We're a prediction machine, the human brain.
Exactly.
So if you were a secret agent, here's another interesting question. If you were a secret agent tasked with learning a language within 60 days, what would be your strategy? We hear all the time about learning languages fast, and we heard about some institutions in America where people learn fast within months. What would your strategy be? Would you change it, or you would just intensify what you already do?
So the most intense language learning sort of experience that I ever had was when I was learning Mandarin Chinese, which is difficult because I had to learn the characters. And I had 3 hours a day with the tutor, with the teacher, and I would spend 5 hours on my own before I collapsed. Not quite. But, of course, that included the learning of the characters, which is very time-consuming because you forget them as quickly as you learn them.
Sorry, that was Saturday and Sunday as well, or you had a moment?
Oh, no. Well, Saturday, Sunday, I had no lessons. No, sorry. 5 days a week with the tutor. But on the weekends, I was there either listening to my open reel tape recorder or reading, lots of reading. But I would have, so the tutor experience, I think it's, if you're on that kind of a timetable, you have to interact with a teacher, native speaker, hopefully, although we can get into this, native speaker versus non-native speaker. But so I would go 3 hours a day, no more with a teacher, no more. Because if you're spending any more than that with a teacher, you're getting tired. You're not getting enough input. But that is good because you're getting that feedback, right away feedback. You're struggling, you're fighting, you're sweating, you're trying to say stuff, all good. And then after 3 hours, you spend 5 hours listening and reading. And if I had to do it on that, on that kind of a timetable, I would write. See, when I learn language, writing is hard. You got to think of what to say. You can't spell if it's a different writing system. So for the dilettante language learner, which is what I am today, I don't write. I can't write in Japanese. I can't write in Russian. I can type, but I can't write. But if I were doing it for 60 days, I would write by hand. That would be part of my 5 hours. So 3 hours with the teacher, 5 hours on my own, listening and reading, writing, and to some degree, vocabulary review. To me, the vocabulary review, which I still do today on Link, because every page on Link, I can click vocabulary review, and I review the words that I don't know on that page. But to me, the vocabulary review has to be tied very close to what you are listening to and reading. It can't be an Anki deck. It can't be a long list. It can't be remote from the actual content, because the goal is to get through the content. The goal is not to grab onto words that you're going to hang on to. That's not going to happen. The goal is to get through that bit of content, occasionally focusing in on some of the new words that showed up there, and then forgetting, like the Zhuang says Fisher, forget. So I would spend some time on vocabulary review sometimes before and after a particular bit of content, lots of listening and reading on my own, and the next day I hit the teacher. And I would do, and then I would write. So 5 hours, 1 hour of writing. Writing is tremendous because then I would write both online where you can look up words and look up the conjugation if you want, rules of grammar, but also writing by hand. Writing by hand because I believe that there is evidence.
This is my handwriting. This is what I do every single day. It's like I write, I don't know if people can see it, but this is all stuff that I write in Greek, in Serbian. Sorry, there's something, but I have, I do handwriting. I discovered that, I haven't discovered this, but I've been doing it since I was 10. This is like a 20. So to your point, this is a notebook I had with, I don't know if you can see it, my handwriting sucks.
I can see it. No, it's very nice. Much worse.
This is in Russian. It's 2014. I also did this with Link. Link is, we were in front of the founder of Link. I learned Chinese just by using Link. Basically, I was just downloading all these wonderful podcasts and I was just like writing. Now it's in the other room, but I've shown it a couple of times. I was writing by hand. And the thing that is amazing is that you remember in context. I remember the word because I remembered the context. For example, there was two guys talking about the earthquake, one of the many earthquakes that struck China. I still remember some words or the wall. It's amazing how the episodic memory works. And also handwriting is just another level. Although, like you, I cannot handwrite in Chinese. I cannot write in Japanese. I can write in Russian with difficulty, but I can type because I've never spent time doing that. But now I went back. I mean, in Russian I can because I did this stuff, but it's been a long time ago. But I would do more or less the same thing.
The thing is, we tend to take the path of least resistance. So it's much easier to write on the computer. It's easier to read on the computer. If I'm reading Arabic on the computer, I can look up a word. I can hear text-to-speech for the word. I can look up the meaning for the word. I find it much more difficult to read a paper book in Persian or Arabic.
True.
So path of least resistance. But if I have a 60-day, you got to learn this language, we're no longer talking about the path of least resistance. We're talking about stuff that works. Handwriting works.
It does.
I'm too lazy to do it, but it works.
I do both. I do both with 70% digital, 30%, handwriting. But first thing in the morning when I wake up, I do writing because it sticks, like glue. Mm-hmm. Anyway, great, the strategy. I would do pretty much the same. So let's talk about philosophy and strategy, more like in general. You made I loved it. I just shared it with a bunch of people. You made recently a video about the don'ts of language learning. And I love the video. And what do you think the biggest mistake? Now, there's a lot of mistakes that people make, but what do you think one or two blunders that people make when starting a new language? Those mistakes that you think that can really sap their attempt to learn a language because they don't know, of course, how to learn it efficiently. They haven't heard from Steve yet.
So if we're talking about mistakes that people make, I'll get into that, but I should start with, again, something you mentioned in your book, which is mindset. So if the mindset is, I don't like the language, like an English-speaking school kid in Vancouver who has no interest in learning French. So the mindset is negative. You're not going to learn.
Of course.
Or the person who doesn't see themselves as potentially a fluent speaker of the language they're learning. So they haven't got the right mindset. So mindset is one thing, but leaving mindset aside, I think a big mistake is that people are conditioned by school to think that language learning is a matter of learning a bunch of complicated grammar rules. So that immediately throws up an obstacle because it's so difficult to learn rules about something that you haven't yet experienced or you don't yet have enough experience of. And so that makes language learning seem more difficult than it need be. So that's number one, mistake number one. Whereas if you can accept the fact that if you are willing to not understand, not remember, and just continue plowing through the language, and if you can find a way to enjoy it, you will eventually reach your goal. So I think the number one thing is that they see language learning as this difficult thing that involves having to remember gender of nouns or, tenses and all the things that make French difficult at school. And these things have convinced those people that they can't learn. So I think it's partly the way languages are taught. People are conditioned to think in those terms. And I think to the extent to which we drill and test people, it also contributes to that. It conjures up this image of language learning as something where I'm bound to fail. So
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So we talked about the biggest mistakes, but what is the one thing that if someone could only dedicate 30 minutes a day, and that is the case for many people, to learning a language, what should they focus on? What's the one thing or two things they should absolutely focus on? Because we always talk about the amount of time, the time slot that we have, be it 30 minutes or 60 minutes. And sometimes we do things to the detriment of others. So if we had, let's say, a 30-minute time slot, what is the one thing that you should focus on, or they should focus on, one or two? I have my answer, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah, the big one is listening, to my mind. Listening because it's the easiest thing to do. So the person who says, I have no time, okay, if I look at my daily routine, I get up, I prepare breakfast, I clean up after breakfast. I've got my half hour of listening in, right there. If I'm going to work out that day or if I'm going to be in my car, it's so easy nowadays. Apple CarPlay, you turn on whatever, podcast. So listening. The thing about listening is if you say, okay, I'm going to listen for half an hour a day. When you listen, you're going to understand, depending on what you're listening to, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. You're not going to understand 100% because at that point, you're no longer learning the language. So you're going to have less than 100% comprehension. That then triggers your curiosity. And curiosity is such a big part of language learning. You're curious about the language. You're curious about the words you didn't understand. You're curious about wanting to see that structure again because you still don't quite understand how it works. So if you devote half hour day to listening, you're probably going to trigger your curiosity to the point where you will then read what it was you were listening to. And I always make sure that anything I listen to, I have access to the transcript online so that I can look up the words. I don't want to just listen. Well, no, that's not true. I do listen. I get on my Persian podcast, because you can't read everything you listen to. But listening triggers curiosity. Curiosity gets you to do other things. Curiosity drives you then to find the transcript. Curiosity about the grammar. It's so easy now to Google, why does it work this way? You see the rule, you see the conjugation table, you quickly forget them. Doesn't matter. It's all helping you gradually to notice things from you. So listening, focus on listening and it'll drive you to do more.
Agreed 100%. And once again, this is what I did with Chinese using Link. I could actually see, I downloaded the transcript. I could see what I was actually listening to. It really helped me with pronunciation and everything else. So that's really useful. How do you stay motivated during the tough moments of language learning? I'm pretty sure you had a few yourself when you're telling yourself, why the heck have I started learning this language or that language?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, one thing you can do is leave it for a day or two and you'll come back fresher.
Like a girlfriend, you leave her, you say, okay, I don't want you anymore for a couple of days. And they come
Does she still love me? Don't want to leave her too long, But, or when I was going through, trying to, or at least poking away at 3 languages at the same time, Arabic, Turkish, and Persian, you can leave one, go to the other, and then come back. You can't quite do that with girlfriends, but anyway, but other than that, I have found that, again, I'm going to refer to Link, but in preparation for my trip to Turkey, I said, according to my statistics at Link, I got 8,000 known words. I'm going to take that to 35,000 known words in a period of 5 months. The way we count words at Link is every form of the word is a different word. So Turkish is one of those words where verbs can have 10 or 15 forms, right? So it's not that difficult to increase your word count. That wouldn't be the case in some other languages. But there are languages where there's so many different forms of so many of the verbs or nouns that you very quickly increase your word count. It doesn't matter what the sort of absolute meaning of 35,000 words is. Does that mean, can I brag? Well, I know 35,000 words and you don't. No, it's just a goal. So it doesn't matter what the goal is. The goal can be, I'm going to listen for 30 minutes a day. And again, you mentioned this in your book. set yourself some measurable goals so that when your sort of inherent interest in the language flags, you're still kicking yourself, nudging yourself, forcing yourself to meet those goals. So there are days, I mean, you know, if you're a manual laborer and your task is to pick up these stones, these large stones, and move them from point A to point B, it's a completely stupid task. However, it's a very clear task. You have 100 stones. You have to go over there, pick them up, heavy stones, and carry them over here. You know when you're finished. There's no more stones at point A, and the stones are all at point B. So, in language learning, when your inherent interest in Italian culture flags, then you say, but I have to get in my 30 minutes, or I have to, you know, save so many words, or some measurable goal daily very often carries you through those periods when your interest flags. And again, if you know, we're in the doldrums here, you know, that long, what I consider the longest period in language learning is between B1 and B2. B1, you can actually say some things, you understand some things, and then you discover there are so many words that you have to learn. And the reality is, as my Ukrainian teacher, Solomia, pointed out, because she did studies on the frequency of vocabulary in different languages. And in every language, frequency declines very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. So the first 500,000 words, wow, look at me, I know all these words. And yet, wherever you go into interesting content, 30% of the content is low-frequency words. And you have to learn those low-frequency words. And it's tough going because you get the feeling you're not getting anywhere. Again, at Link, if I see my known word total is increasing, I went from 8,000 words of Turkish to 35,000 words of Turkish, whatever that means, I'm achieving something. And I notice that on my page at Link, it's whiter and whiter. There are fewer and fewer colored words that I don't know. So that you have these other indicators that you're getting better, even though you kind of feel, you know, I still don't understand and I still can't say what I want to say and I keep on forgetting. So if you have some sort of objective indicators that you are, in fact, meeting your goals, you are daily goals or longer term goals, all of this helps to keep you going. And then you get those moments when you realize, hey, I understood that really well. So you have your eureka moments where you feel that you actually have achieved something. But I think some kind of objective goal like that is useful to keep you going.
I agree. What I read in some book that what can be measured grows. So I like that, you know, it's interesting. What has been the most challenging language for you to learn? Mine is Japanese, without a doubt. But is there a language that, you know, you've been tackling, I don't know, 20 languages, 25? I lost count. So is there a
20,
language?
And I'm going to stop. But
No, you're not going to stop. You're probably going to continue like me for the rest of my life.
Apparently we're going to get Punjabi and Irish Gaelic at Link.
Oh, wow.
So because there's a lot of Punjabi speakers in Vancouver, I may just, and very often the checkout person at the supermarket is slightly dark complexion, and I try my Persian on her, and turns out she's a Punjabi speaker. So I got to get my Punjabi up so that I can also do that in the supermarket.
Ever thought of learning Hungarian? I want to ask you this question because I'm pretty sure you've been to Budapest.
People say, why don't you learn Finnish? Why don't you learn Hungarian? Why don't you learn Thai? I mean, there's no end to languages to learn. But let's say that in the Vancouver context, Punjabi is there's far more. I don't know where I would go to find a Hungarian speaker. Hungarian, of course, is interesting because of the culture, the history, and to understand more about how those people who actually are indistinct genetically are just like their neighbors, right? This whole myth that Hungarians are some kind of Turkish or whatever. No, they're not. They're the same genetic mix of Europeans as their neighbors, but they have a language which has an interesting background, and of course the Hungarians are very proud of their unique culture, which it is. It's unique, but every culture is unique. So, but all that being said, the answer is no. There's a limit. I have to resist. You know, I'd love to learn Finnish. You know, I'm going to be in Iceland for a couple of days. Oh, I'll learn Icelandic. Well, no, Steve, you're not, because the reality is, I'll learn this language because I'm going to go there. I tried to learn Vietnamese because I was going to go there. It takes a long time. It's not like a month of Icelandic is going to get me anywhere.
Of
So I'm
course.
tired of having these short spurts of activity in a language, and thereafter I can't maintain the language. So no.
What about the
If I
most
were to,
challenging, which was my original question? Sorry.
yeah. So the most challenging, it depends on your learning environment. So Japanese for me was not challenging because I was in Japan. So I was surrounded by the language. I'm just gradually learning it. I'm communicating, however poorly, with people around me. I'm reading, massively reading. I have the Chinese characters from Chinese, so I can read. Not challenging. Chinese, sure, it was challenging, but I was full-time, like 6-7 hours a day, so it was okay. What I have found very challenging, so Korean was challenging, even though I had a lot of the vocabulary. I think I expected Korean to be easier because I have Chinese characters and I had learned Japanese, so the word order is similar to Japanese. The pronunciation is similar to Japanese. I found it more difficult. So that was, maybe I expected it to be sort of low-hanging fruit, which it wasn't. But right now I would say Arabic. Arabic is so even with Turkish, it's difficult. They got, 20 tenses for all their verbs and stuff, but it's written in the Latin alphabet. So any word, I can pronounce it. I can actually grab a paper book and work my way through it with missing words. I can't do that in Arabic. I can hardly make out what the words are. It takes so long to get used to. Or if I were writing Arabic by hand or Persian, I'd be much further ahead, but I'm too lazy to do that. But if I did, I'd be further ahead. But so right now, I would say that most challenging, certainly Arabic, because they're different forms. So Persian is a lot easier. Persian doesn't have gender. Persian grammar is more similar to what we're used to. Persian, if it were written in the Latin alphabet, is actually quite an easy language to learn. Arabic is difficult. Easiest, in a way, is Romanian. I know you claimed that you struggled with Romanian because you thought it was going to be a form of like Piemontese or something. It's actually it's a different language, different grammar, but there's so much common vocabulary. And vocabulary is big. If you've got a lot of common vocabulary, you're in a good spot. So Romanian was easiest. What I found difficult, and I am very impressed with, say, Benny, the Irish polyglot, going from Spanish to Portuguese. It's very hard to move yourself from you've got the Spanish accent down, and now you got to throw yourself into a Portuguese accent. I found that difficult. But anyway, some people do it. Language simp, he's amazing, and he can do them all. And you said Wise is just amazing. I don't know, do you do Portuguese as well?
I do Portuguese from Portugal.
From Portugal, yeah, that's a toughie too.
It's a toughie.
You learn to chew all your vowels, and
yeah, that's exactly right. Most people ask me, why'd you learn Portuguese from Portugal? They say use the word chato, which means ugly. I like it. It's just
I like it too. I like it.
I just like it.
Yeah.
A question that comes up all the time, and it's very appropriate for you, is how do you balance maintaining all these languages and learning new ones? This is a question I get all the time. So you hinted at it before that sometimes you go like, hey, but there's Persian here, and then there's Arabic, and then how do you choose? Because the more, I always say that a polyglot, it's easier in a way to learn languages, some languages, if they're similar to some languages you already have under your belt, but then you have more languages to tackle. It's just like a family. You have the children, you have the teenagers, and then you have the adults. So how do you manage a never-growing family?
Exactly, and that's where there are times when I say enough is enough. I've got so many, neglected children. Languages that I claim I speak, but if someone came up to me and started speaking to me in that language, I would struggle. I would struggle at first, and it would come back. I have no doubt. So my quick answer is, I don't worry about it. I make no effort to maintain my languages. I know from experience that if I were to go in, let's say a weak language, I say Polish, and to try and upgrade my Polish, I'd have to do it again 6 months later or a year later. It's pointless. And so my wife and I went to Poland. So I worked on my Polish, watched Polish movies, read some Polish books, did an interview in Polish, which was mangled Czech, Ukrainian, you name it. But I communicate. I'm happy. So what? Now, and so I sort of juiced up my Polish, and now it's back again. So I cannot, if I have a specific need, like Turkish, okay, I did some Turkish 5 years ago. We're going to Turkey, bring it up to a certain level. Now, if I don't do my Turkish, it's going to decline again. But I don't worry about it. Whatever I have invested in a language is time well spent. It was enjoyable. If I have the interest or the need to go back there and to bring it back, it'll relatively quickly come back to the level where it was. And in fact, very soon will go beyond where it was. So I know that. I know I have these languages in reserve. I can go there anytime. It's like you have you're boiling soup on the stove. You've got, in my case, 20 hot stove pots, right? And you got some of them on simmer and some of them even turned off. And whenever you need, just go turn it on again. So why would I turn it on and turn it off and turn this one on and turn it off? It doesn't serve any purpose. So now the dilemma for me is, do I go back and try to become better in some of these languages, like Greek, which has really been neglected, or do I sort of explore a new language? So I had decided that my New Year's resolution was going to be that enough is enough. I got to go back and fix up the languages, my neglected orphan children at home that aren't properly fed and dressed in rags. So enough is enough. But then when I found out, and I don't control what happens at Link, so all of a sudden I discovered that we're going to have Punjabi.
Wonderful.
So I said,
so you can talk to the lady at the supermarket.
Maybe I'm going to have to learn Punjabi. But I don't worry about maintaining anything.
I think because you focus on the process, which is the most important thing, while a lot of people focus on performance. We've been instructed to think about performance in general through the school system. Well, we just enjoy languages, and they will come back. One last question to conclude this wonderful interview is, what are your plans for 2025? We're recording this in December 2024. This will come out in a few days or a few weeks. So I'm curious to know what are your plans for maybe Punjabi, you already hinted at it, but what countries will you visit? And does traveling impact your motivation to learn a new language or go back to your previous one? You already replied. It's obvious your answer, but I want to hear it from the horse's mouth, as they say.
So at this point, it looks like that I like to travel once a year with my wife, go somewhere. We always go somewhere exotic where the language is different. It's not English, which is fun for me, but not so much fun for my wife. So she's standing there while I'm chatting away in Turkish, So, but I have two sons, Mark, who lives in Vancouver, and Eric, who lives in London, England. And our youngest granddaughter is graduating. So we decided, we should have a trip in the UK. And I've never, I've been to London to visit with my son there, obviously, every year or two we go there. And when I was a student in France, I used to hitchhike around in the UK. Never got any further north than Birmingham. But we said, okay, we're going to go to Scotland. We're going to go from Edinburgh to Inverness with the kids, with my son, the daughter-in-law, and two kids. And if we're going to do that, then why don't we also go to Ireland? So we are, in fact, going to fly to Reykjavik, which is the best way to get over there. It's a shorter haul. Spend a day or two in Reykjavik, fly into Ireland, tour around. My wife is very keen on golf, which is part of why we come down to Palm Springs. So we're going to go down to County Kerry. And apparently that's an area of Ireland where they speak Gaelic. So we'll see what happens. So Ireland, Scotland, I'm not going to learn Scottish Gaelic, but I don't think I'll learn Irish Gaelic either. But I might, apparently we're going to get that at Link, so I might spend a little bit of time with Irish Gaelic. But then right now, Punjabi looms. If I'm not, the original plan for 2025 was to go back and clean up some of my other language. Now, if we get Punjabi, I think, because I've always wanted to learn a language from India. So I speak Chinese, I speak, Arabic to some extent, Slavic languages, Romance languages. The whole Indian subcontinent, I know nothing. Hindi, okay, but all the Indians that I come across speak English so well, they probably would never give me a chance. But the Punjabi community in Vancouver does speak Punjabi a lot. There's Punjabi radio and television. And some of the more recent immigrants may have trouble speaking English, so maybe I can hit up a cashier at the supermarket, practice my Punjabi. So if I learn a language in 2025, it'll probably be Punjabi.
And thank you very much. To conclude, I just wanted to, for those few left who don't know Steve is the founder of Link, LINGQ, and it's a great website. I've I've been using it extensively, and I learned Chinese, and I can't wait to go back to using it for Turkish, which is a language I'm also learning. And also, I wanted to say we made another interview, an hour interview like this one, that you can find on his channel, and I will leave all the links of link plus the interview in the description box and in the pinned comment in the comment section. Thank you very much, Steve, for coming.
Thank you. Very enjoyable.
I'll see you in 2025. Bye.
Bye-bye.